Hello everyone. So the next topic which we will be going to study is about the transport in plants. So what is transportation? Transportation is the process that involves the movement of water and necessary nutrients to all the parts of the plant for its survival. So here is a figure which is showing a plant, and the water and minerals are taken up by the roots. So this is the soil and the roots are below the soil. So water and minerals are taken up by the roots, and glucose moves down to the growing roots. The glucose will move down to the growing roots. Here it is a bud, and there is a leaf, and the stem are also labeled. So glucose moves up to the growing bud. So glucose is moving to the growing bud, and it is going down to for the growth of the root. Here, when the water and minerals are transported, it will get into the leaves. So water and minerals from the soil are getting into the leaves, and glucose are made through the photosynthesis. So this is the whole process of how the transportation involves the movement of water and necessary nutrients to all the parts of the plants for its survival. So transportation in plants occurs in three levels. So what are the three levels? Transportation of substance from one cell to the another. There is a long distance transport of sap within the xylem and phloem. So they are responsible for the water and nutrients transport. Then the release and uptake of solute and water by the individual cells. So these are the three processes or three levels in which the transportation in the plants occurs. So water absorption in plants. There are two types of absorption which are commonly used in the plant. So first is active absorption and second is passive absorption. So what happens in active absorption? In the case of active absorption, the water moves to symblast and it is absorbed according to the diffusion pressure defilate changes. So this is known as the active absorption. So the rate of absorption is slow here. So the active absorption is generally slow because it comprises of osmotic and non-osmotic forces. So it comprises of two forces, that is osmotic and non-osmotic. Then humidity and temperature can have an impact on the active absorption, because the force required for the active absorption is mainly generated in the root cells itself. So there would be a decrease in the rate of water absorption if there is a metabolic inhibitor which has been applied. So this was about the active absorption. Now what is about passive absorption? So if we differentiate between the two, active absorption is generally slow. The rate of absorption is slow in the plants, but in case of passive absorption, the rate of absorption is fast here. So it occurs in the plants which is transpiring plants. The movement of water in plants is through apoblast and it is absorbed due to the transcription pull. It is created due to the force which has been created in the xylem sap. So the difference here is that first difference is that the active absorption is slow and the passive absorption is fast. Second difference is they are rapidly occurring in the transcribing plants, but here they occurs through the water moves through the symblast and they have a diffusion pressure deflect charges changes, but in this case they occurs in the apoblast which is absorbed due to the transcriptional pull, and it is created to the stress created in the xylem sap. So these are some of the main differences. Then the rate of absorption significantly depends upon the rate of transcription. So the rate depends on the transcription rate, the absorption rate. The force required for the absorption of water is mainly generated in the mesophyll cells. So they generally occur in the mesophyll cells. So this was about the water absorption of active absorption and passive absorption in plants. Next is transportation in plants, which occurs in two types of tissues, that is xylem and phloem. So xylem is a long non-living tube running from the roots to the leaves through the stem, and the water is absorbed by the root hairs and it undergoes the cell movement by the osmosis process. So the water is then transported through the xylem to the leaves and is evaporated by the process of transcription. So what is the main function of xylem? That it helps in the transportation of water. So the xylem is also composed of elongated cells like the phloem. Xylem is specially accountable for transporting water to all the parts of the roots from the roots. So since they serve as an important function, a single tree would have a lot of xylem tissues. So they will have a lot of xylem tissues because their main role is to transport the water in the plants. Now, what is the role of xylem? Xylem is responsible for the translocation of the nutrients, just like and sugars like carbohydrates, which is produced by the leaves, to the areas of the plants that are metabolically active. So what happens is they make by the help of the leaves, they make the carbohydrates, and they will transport the carbohydrates to various parts of the plant which are metabolically active. So it is made up of living cells, and the cell walls of these cells form small hole at the end of the cell, which is also known as sieve plates. So we will have a full discussion, a full presentation on the phloem topic also. So it will be discussed in what are sieve plates, and through a diagrammatic representation it will be shown how are sieve plates being depicted in the phloem tissue. So this is the transportation in plants through the two types of conducting tissues. Then what are the means of transportation in plants? There are three means of transportation in plants, that is diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and the next is given in the next slide. So what is diffusion? It is a transportation process that involves the passive movement of a substance from cell to cell or from one plant part to the cell. So this is called as the diffusion process. Its outcome does not entail the energy expenditure. So here the molecules move in a random manner. So it is a slow process. The diffusion process is generally slow because the substances here move from the higher concentration to the lower concentration, and it is the only means via which the gases can be transported in case of the plants. So the rate of diffusion depends upon the temperature and the pressure and on the gradient concentration. So this was about the diffusion. Then what is facilitated diffusion? The gradient is a vital component for the process of diffusion. So here a smaller substance has diffused faster when compared to larger ones. So what is facilitated diffusion? It is a passive process, that is antipode, unipode, and sympode. So antipode proteins, they exchange the solutes by transporting them and out of the cells. And the main function of the unipode, the three functions of antipode, unipode, and sympode are given here. So antipode function is the exchange of solutes by transporting them in and out of the cell. The main function of unipode is to carry the single solute across the membrane, and the main function of sympode proteins are they transfer two different solutes simultaneously in the same direction. So this was about the means of transportation. The next third means of transportation is the active transport. So in active transport, it pumps the molecules against the concentration gradient. So here the energy is required. Energy in the form of ATP is required to drive the pump. So ATP donates a phosphate to a particular gateway molecule, which then pumps the desired molecule across the membrane. So this is about the active transport. Then what are the driving forces that are responsible for the transportation in plants? So there are four driving forces which are being described: the transcription, the force of surface tension, the water potential gradient, and the force of hydrogen bonding between the water molecules. So these are responsible for the transportation of water and minerals in the plants. So we will be discussing each of these in detail. So first is transcription. What is transcription? It is basically a driving force which is behind the uptake and the transport of water. So this is transcription. In this, there is a process of water evaporation through the openings called stomata, and this creates a pull by replacing the water that has evaporated. So this pull in the xylem tissue extends all the way down due to cohesive forces. So this negative pressure that occurs in the roots will even naturally result in the uptake of the water from the soil. So this is known as the transcription process. Then next comes the force of surface tension. In this, when the molecules they evaporate from the water film, there is an increase in the curvature of the meniscence, in which in turn increases the surface tension. So there will be an increase in surface tension. So water from the surrounding cells, they pull towards this area to reduce the reduction. So there will be, when the water is from the surrounding tissues, it will pull towards this area, and it will lead to the reduction in the tension, surface tension. Next comes the water potential gradient. So when the water moves from the roots to the leaves because of the water potential gradient, water potential gradient is generally the higher in water surroundings, the roots, and the lowest in the airspace within the spongy parenchyma. So this is known as the water potential gradient. And last is the force of hydrogen bonding between water molecules. So the water molecules stick to each other by hydrogen bonds. The formula is H2O, and the molecules of hydrogen are stick to each other. So the above forces are communicated to water molecules within the xylem through the hydrogen bond. So xylem is responsible for the water transport in plants. So it will be communicated to water molecules within the xylem through the hydrogen bond. So this is the force of hydrogen bonding between the water molecules. So this was all about the transport in plants. We have discussed and covered almost everything in transport of